Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Blake Center, I welcome you to our first event of the 2020 conferences. We are very excited to see you all throughout the next couple days at our different events. A couple of things to mention right now. On Friday, there will be a Mac Brock concert. Check out Azu socials for that. There will be community credit. There's also a code up front if you need that. There's also a CHE Tri-College Service Day coming up, April 24th. Check out their socials as well for information. There will be community credit for that. And also, Jumpstart applications have opened already, so keep an eye out for information for that as well.
Hello?
Hola, mi nombre es Emma López y soy parte de Walla Walla Immigration Right Coalition.
Hi everyone, my name is Eugenio Rojas and I am part of Walla Walla Immigrants Right Coalition and I will try to translate her as much as I can. Thank you.
Esta organización fue fundada en el 2017 con el propósito de ayudar a los inmigrantes de nuestra comunidad, específicamente a los indocumentados.
This organization was founded in 2017 with the purpose of serving the immigrant community, specifically the undocumented.
Por el miedo de la deportación masiva, el grupo está dividido en diferentes comités para servir mejor a los más vulnerables de nuestra comunidad.
With fear of mass deportation, the organization was divided into many subcommittees to better serve our most vulnerable community members.
Nuestra línea de apoyo ha estado operando continuamente los 7 días de la semana, las 24 horas, por los últimos 5 años.
Our hotline has been operating continuously 24/7 for the past 5 years.
La pandemia ha afectado a la comunidad, por lo tanto, nosotros hemos extendido nuestros servicios.
The pandemic has affected the community members that we serve. Therefore, our services have expanded.
En nuestros 5 años de organización, hemos tenido el privilegio de trabajar con muchos estudiantes de Whitman College como voluntarios usando sus habilidades con la tecnología.
In the past five years of existence, we have had the privilege of working with many students from Whitman College who serve as volunteers by joining one of our subcommittees using their expertise in technology.
Muchos de esos estudiantes, después de graduarse, han regresado a su comunidad y algunos han formado organizaciones similares para ayudar mejor a su comunidad. Otros han encontrado trabajos en organizaciones sin lucro con las mismas metas y propósitos que a nuestra organización.
Most of these students, after graduating and returning home, have joined similar organizations or started one also. Others found jobs in nonprofit organizations that serve the same purpose as ours. If you guys have any questions, we will have a table sitting out there for her to answer a few of your questions if you have one. Thank you.
Gracias.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Bienvenidos a todos. So, let's think back. 49 years ago, it's June 1971, and Guadalupe Gamboa just changed Washington history by refusing to leave the Rogers Walla Walla labor camp. He had previously been invited by migrant workers who sought help with the payment of their wages. When he and his lawyer, Michael Fox, were asked to leave the premises by a supervisor employee, they refused to leave and were arrested and convicted of criminal trespassing in Walla Walla District Court. This conviction, though, was overturned unanimously in the Washington Supreme Court in State versus Fox. So this signaled the start of organizational and legal challenges to a feudal-like era where farm workers were not being protected by the law. Through their efforts, Lupe and Mike helped establish laws that allowed labor organizers, lawyers, migrant assistant workers, and also religious workers to enter the farm labor housing for the last 49 years. Lupe and Mike will talk about their role in this continuing fight against structural racism and for the continued fight for farm worker justice. So please bring your hands together to welcome Lupe Gamboa and Michael Fox.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction, and I want to thank everybody here also for attending. I know that you're all very busy going to school and getting your studies under control. I also want to thank Dr. I know her as Curran, right? I know her by her first name, and also the Blake Center for giving us the time to talk about this topic, which is a very important topic. As Jennifer mentioned, I was arrested in Rogers, Walla Walla when I stood up for my rights and the rights of workers to have people, have access to people that they wanted to see them. Let me back up a little bit. I know I only have like 20 minutes, so I'll try to cover as much as I can because the Farmworkers Struggle has been going on for a long time. Let me start with, learning how to operate. The people ask, how did you get involved with the farm workers movement? And my simple answer is that I was born into it. This is a photo of my father, Guadalupe Gamboa, and me. You can see it on the top corner, right corner, and my dog, Tuffy. We were on the road around 1954, and this is how migrants used to travel, from state to state, because we had to travel. When you got done working in a place, there was no unemployment compensation, there was no industrial insurance coverage. If you got injured, you had to pay for the cost of the injury. Housing was terrible, and so we were forced, to migrate. And the first migration of Mexican Americans from the border areas, especially Edinburgh, Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, started in the late 40s. That's when my parents came up. But before that, my father and mother, Arcadio and Martina Gamboa Molina at that time, had migrated from northern Mexico and come into, to Texas, seeking for, like all migrants, seeking a better lives for themselves and then later on for their children. So we landed but it was hard. It was hard at first, to find a better life. This is a photo of my sister, Dorothy, age 12, and fellow asparagus cutter. And I say fellow because of the dire economic conditions, farm workers, were forced to put their children to work. If one person earned $1 an hour, 4 people could earn $4 an hour, which was probably what an average industrial worker earned. So at a very early age, she would get up early in the morning and work all day until all the asparagus was cut, and then start again 7 days a week until the asparagus harvest ended. And just an aside, the person on the right is a Filipino worker who had the history of agriculture is that they've always looked for different immigrant groups that they can come up and exploit, basically, can work for very low wages. And Filipino brothers, and I say brothers because women were not allowed to bring women with them according to the immigration laws. they came up and worked for a while, and then, and then when they were old, they didn't have a family to fall back on. We used to follow a migrant route from Washington to Oregon, Washington asparagus and sugar beets, Oregon string beans, and then California picking cotton. Well, there was still cotton to be picked, the machines took over, but but we, the first 2 years we left our home in Texas, that my father had built my mother, and and this is a photo taken by a cousin of ours. It's a professional photo. That's why it's so clear, and shows all of my family. And on the top left is Sheila. Let me get who is right here. Thank you. And then after her is Ramona, and then Tomasa, and then to her immediate left is Andres Garcia, and then Concha Gamboa, and then Dorothy, who was the one that you saw a little while ago in the photo. And then the bottom tier is my sister Frances, and then that's me right next to her, besides my father on the left, Arcadio Gamboa, then my mother, Martina Gamboa, and then my sister, my little sister, Maria, who is also here. And the reason in the 1960s, these photos were taken in the 50s, but conditions continued to be bad. And in the 1960s, a photojournalist by the name of Erwin Nash, very socially conscious, learned that conditions were really terrible in the Yakima Valley for this new wave of farm workers, and started coming to the valley on his own dime and taking pictures. And the reason he wanted to do that is because he wanted to give a face to the people that pick the crops, because we were always hidden away, and people just talked about us as victims, never as fully formed human beings. And so that's why I took the time to introduce my family. Oops, I'm having trouble with this. Can you move back a little bit? This thing, is it another one? Okay. So anyway, so we went back to Texas just a couple of times, and then we just followed the migrant stream. And the bad conditions continued into the 70s. This is a picture of another family member, Andy Garcia, picking asparagus. The work was just really hard, because for every spear of asparagus that you see in the store, somebody has to pick down and bend down and cut it, and then cut the right kind, and also cut the bad kind, and that one you don't put in your can, and put it in a can. And here Andy was about 10 years old, and as you can see that he was carrying a can of asparagus, and those cans are heavy, about 20 pounds. And they would work in the mornings. Luckily, by this time, they were just working in the morning and in the afternoon, but you had to work starting at a very early age. I myself had several experiences that formed in me a desire to try to work to change the conditions. And I'll just talk about it. The first was when I was working at hoeing sugar beets. I was earning $1 an hour back in the early 60s. And my father, who was an experienced, small farmer and farm worker, and all the other family members were working $1 an hour. Everybody got paid the same, no matter if you were experienced or not, and I didn't think that was fair. The other experience that I had was when as you can see from the photo, we had a lot of girls in our family, and at that time they didn't provide any bathroom facilities or water or in the fields or toilets. And my father asked me to ask our employer, Richard Cassabaum, in Outlook, for if we could put a toilet in the field so that so that the girls could go. And he kind of thought about it a minute, and then he shook his head and laughed and said, no, that would be too unsightly. If they want to go to the bathroom, they can drive to their home, and the home was a mile away. Can you imagine working in a place like that and be treated like that? And the last one is that one of my sisters, Dorothy, who you saw before, a couple of slides ago, came home one day, and I remember this because I was a young kid by that time, and she had just been sprayed with pesticides, or had been in a field that had been recently sprayed with pesticide. And I talked to her before I came here, and I said, how did you know it was pesticide? She said, well, we didn't really know, but it smelled bad, and my face started twitching around my eyes and my mouth, and I felt terrible. So my sister, at the end of that work day, she had to keep on working, took her to the hospital, and they gave her some medication, and she, of course, ended up paying for the medication because we had no workers' compensation. And so it was these indignities and injustices that drove me to try to do something about it. And in 1964, I graduated from Sunnyside High School and got a small scholarship, went to YVC, Yakima Valley College, and met Tomas Villanueva, who was also another student from a farm worker background, but he had come from Mexico. I was born in the U.S., and we started talking about how we had to do something about it. And then we heard that farm worker by the name of Cesar Chavez had started to organize farm workers in California. So one day we got into his car and drove, it's about 1,000 some miles to Delano, California, looking for Cesar Chavez. And in our mind, given the cultural conditioning that we had, we were looking for a tall, pale-looking guy with a suit and driving a big car. Couldn't find him in the fancy part of town, and then we ended up in a little house by the edge of a vineyard, and we asked the workers, "Where's Cesar Chavez?" And we looked, and he said, "There he is." And we looked, and we couldn't see him, but then in the middle we saw, a very short man, very dark skin with jet black hair, and that was Cesar Chavez. So what really impressed us about him was not so much what he said, because he wasn't an especially eloquent speaker, but what impressed us was the complete transformation that he had imparted on the workers. They were all in the middle of a campaign there. They were eager. They believed in themselves. They thought they could change things, which is completely different from our situation here in Washington. And the other thing that impressed us is that he put us to work right away. He assigned us to go chase a truck that we thought was bringing in strikebreakers to a strike, and I was appointed to get on the bus, and got on the bus, and Tomas followed us, and it ended up in a tomato field, so I was spared that, having to do too much. He picked me up and took me back to the office. So after that, Cesar had started the strike in 1975 in the fields, and the grape fields in California, and the strike was broken like a lot of strikes are in agriculture, very, very quickly, through using the courts and strike breakers. So what Cesar discovered by accident was that if he sent the strikers to the cities and told people about what was going on in the fields and asked, appealed to their conscience as workers and as people that believe in justice, and he had a simple request, don't buy grapes until the growers sit down and negotiate with us. And it turned out to be very effective. By 1970, Gallo did a poll that found out that 17 million Americans had quit eating grapes completely, and the growers finally found themselves with warehouses full of grapes they couldn't sell, or they had to sit down and negotiate. And so this happened, and when that happened, and I'll skip over some other stuff, but the news spread throughout the farm worker community because the contracts that got signed included things like higher minimum wages, rest breaks, toilets in the fields, protection against pesticides, grievance procedure, which basically what you're talking about is respect and dignity for the people that pick the food that everybody eats. So, let's see. Oh, and his helper was Dolores Huerta, a very, very brave and strong and supporter of the Farm Workers Union. She helped start the union. And here's a picture of Cesar Chavez and Tomás Villanueva in 1969, marching in the Yakima Valley, asking people to boycott grapes. Tomás is the one carrying the sign, and Cesar Chavez is the one in the plaid jacket to the left. Okay. So anyway, so the strikes, where did the strike spread to the Yakima Valley? And how it started was kind of fortuitous. Some university students came to the valley, and where they were from, actually, the university had been forced to admit minority students thanks to the efforts of the Black Student Union at that time, and they were all from the first group that got admitted was 28 students, and they became involved in the boycott, and then very involved in the boycott, and then two of them were from Granger, and the story goes that they were having a barbecue at their mother's house when two workers came by saying they were going to quit working at the local Yakima Chief Ranch because the wages, were never increased, and because women were paid less than men. And so the Trevino brothers said, "Don't quit. Why don't you organize and strike like Cesar Chavez just did in California?" So sure enough, they did that, and the next day, on Labor Day weekend in 1970, September 1970, they went and pulled all the workers out of the little Yakima Chief Ranch, and then they found out that the Yakima Chief, this is in the hop yards, and you can see some of the hop trucks. So then they went to the bigger Yakima Chief Ranch and picketed and pulled out, workers stopped working, and these are trucks loaded with hops, that aren't being unloaded. Okay, again, can you do the slide? And this is, no. And women are very involved, actually, in the strikes. Here's a picture of a whole bunch of women with picket signs, which is holding signs asking other workers to join the strike, for better wages. And on the right, extreme right, a woman that's partially hidden by roses is Matilde Trevino, the mother of Roberto and Carlos Trevino, who was a very, very effective and very influential leader in her community. Next. And this, while people were striking, we sat down and started writing the demands that people were going to ask for their employers in order to go back to work. And you can see me here as a young person in sunglasses, writing down the demands. And then we presented those to the employer. And next. And one of the demands was that they hold a union election, and a union election was held at the Yakima Chief Ranch in September of 1970, and it was no contest. The union won 105 yes and no 3, and and everybody thought that we had won, because you win an election, the workers say they want a union, the growers supposed to negotiate, right? Well, that wasn't the case. What happened, we started running into trouble. At one ranch that Mike is going to talk about, Padnote and Real, the organizers were met with growers holding shotguns aimed at the workers and the picketers, and that quashed that strike. And then the growers also went and started a campaign in Olympia through their powerful legislators to try to stop the union by outlawing strikes and boycotts. And so the union once again had to turn to the boycott. But okay, next, I'll get to finish with that. What happened then is that after we got, we used to call union meetings and people would come, but after the intimidation campaign started, nobody would come. And so we, in the hub, so we decided to go to in the asparagus, and we went to Rogers Walla Walla labor camp that, again, Mike is going to be talking about. And it's right here just outside of Walla Walla. And we were met, initially I went and there was just a security, just a supervisor, and then they told us about a bunch of problems that they had that Mike will discuss. So I told him I would come back with my trusty lawyer, Mike Fox, who had about a year and a half of experience. And the issue was that the workers were brought over from Texas and by the state under a contract, but then the employer wasn't complying with the terms of the contract, and especially the bonus system. They would withhold a portion of the workers' pay and call it a bonus, and then if they stayed till the end of the harvest when the asparagus was very poor, they would give it to them, but then all of a sudden they would find different excuses for getting rid of them. And I remember going into the labor camp, and in the cafeteria they had a list in Spanish that said, "Esos trabajadores ya no tienen bonos." You know, people were just losing their bonus pay left and right. So the next, when we returned, a couple of days later with my lawyer and actually Erwin Nash, and this time there was a deputy sheriff with a rifle, not a rifle but a gun, and a sheriff's uniform and a badge. And they asked if we had gotten permission from the grower, and I said, you know, we don't want to talk to the grower, we want to talk to the workers. And Mike started talking to him, and while he was talking to him, I went inside and found a worker, and then, you know, that was the basis of our lawsuit then that Mike will talk about next. Anyway, it's a long story, but it's never a dull moment. Thank you.
Can you turn that mic off? Because I think it picks up feedback.
Okay.
Good morning. As Lupe mentioned and Jennifer mentioned, my name is Michael Fox. I'm a retired lawyer and judge. I got my start in my legal career with Lupe Gamboa in 1970. And people have asked me, why did you get involved in this? And as many of you know, this renewed interest in the history of the farm labor movement in Washington State has been stimulated by a collection of 10,000 photographs taken by a good friend of Lupe's and mine named Erwin Nash. Erwin Nash himself dedicated many years to chronicling the situation where workers would be exploited, underpaid, in some cases cheated, and discriminated against. And he did that out of a social and religious conviction. His parents were Jewish immigrants from Poland who settled in the central area of Seattle. And Erwin tells the story of all of a sudden his young Japanese friends in the neighborhood were gone. He later found out they'd been jailed because of the executive order signed by President Roosevelt in 1942. And he, in 1967 and 8, he began to go over to the Yakima Valley and document the lives of farm workers, their families, their work. And this collection of photographs has made me think a lot in my now later years about why I did get involved. And in thinking about it, I think that certainly one of the reasons was my strong religious involvement as a child, where I learned some lessons about right and wrong. And when I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s, that was really the biggest issue in the country was the civil rights movement. And all you had to do was watch television to see that what was being done in the South with African Americans was unjust, and it was simply wrong. And that was my first interest in this. I think how I got involved was occasioned by serendipity, however. In 1969 and 1970, when I first arrived in Washington State, there were basically no Spanish-speaking lawyers in the state. And my best subject in high school had been Spanish. And I took it for 3 years, and then I took it for 2 years in the university. And I had a reasonable facility to speak Spanish. And when these strikes occurred in the fall of 1970, I was the one who was sent from Seattle to work with the workers and the organizers in the Yakima Valley area. Another thing that I think limits all of us sometimes is our adherence to stereotypes about people. And I've been guilty of that as well as others. For example, the first day that I arrived at a picket line in the Yakima Valley, this was all totally new to me. And there were a number of workers who were picketing at this particular hop ranch, and emotions were high. The employer, the grower, was there, and he was very angry. And I noticed a deputy sheriff, who I later learned his name was Deputy Berkelbein. And I immediately stereotyped him as someone who was going to, in some way, interfere with this organizational effort. He somehow learned that I was a lawyer, and part of the reason I had this stereotype was what had happened in California, where the local sheriff's departments in the areas around Salinas and Tulare and Kern counties and other counties where there was a lot of organizing were very anti the United Farm Workers movement. Some workers were beaten, but that wasn't enough. Officer Berkelbein wasn't involved with that. So he started coming over towards me. He somehow figured out that I was a lawyer, although I certainly wasn't dressed like a normal lawyer would be. I was in blue jeans and short sleeve shirt, but I had a yellow pad. I guess that's what gave me away. And he came over to me, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to get arrested. This is crazy, but that's what's going to happen. But instead, he came up to me and he said, are you a lawyer? Are you working with these people? I said, well, yes, sir, I am. He said, well, what is it going to take to get these guys back to work? I mean, I shouldn't have to be here. I should be out on the highway enforcing the traffic laws and other things like that. So what's it going to take? And I said, well, they want 30 cents more an hour. They want the end of what we called the bonus system, which was kind of a wage withholding mechanism where wages would be withheld until the end of the season. And he said, well, let me go talk to Mr. Jones, the grower. And I was surprised. I didn't think he was going to be acting as a facilitator or a mediator. I thought he was going to be just trying to shut this down. And it wound up with us, through Deputy Berkelbein, reaching an agreement. And I drew up in handwriting on a yellow pad like this on the hood of my car a simple agreement that the workers would go back to work and the wages would be raised by so much, and the grower signed it. And I was elated, and I think the workers were too. And they went back to work, and we didn't hear any other incidents. These strikes were going on at many other hop ranches. Now, I know that the theme of your conference is basically about race and the effect that race has had and racial perceptions on the history of Latinos in Eastern Washington. And I think it's fair to look at some of these events in the prism of race, because that certainly came up in the first major case we had. In September 9th and 10th, 1970, a strike started, as Lupe mentioned, at the Eli Patno Don Real hop ranch. And these two growers had a cooperative arrangement where they used Patno's kiln to process the hops harvested by both of them. A strike occurred, a picket line was set up, and we began negotiations with the grower, just like we had on my yellow pad at the other ranch. We went into the living room. Roberto Trevino, one of the organizers, and I went into the living room of Mr. Real, and again, emotions are pretty high. And I was 25 years old. This was my first significant legal experience with not only a major lawsuit, but a social struggle. And as is set forth in the findings that were signed by Judge Patrick in the case that emerged from this in Benton County. He made these findings. The phrase, paragraph 56, the phrase beaners is a derogatory phrase directed towards Mexican Americans as a racial group. Paragraph 57. On September 11th, 1970, during the negotiation in which a rough contract was prepared with Fox and Trevino in attendance, Donald Real stated to Roberto Trevino, who is of Mexican-American origin, that if there was any more trouble, there would be some dead beaners in the road. So race was certainly involved. And there were other derogatory comments made by both Patnode and Real during this period. Nonetheless, negotiations continued. Real actually signed a contract, and then Patnode got out some guns and brandished them, and effectively killed the strike by threats of violence towards the people who were picketing. Now, we were in sort of a no man's legal land in this particular case. In 1935, as part of the New Deal, the Congress passed what's called the Wagner Act, or the National Labor Relations Act. And that act provided a federally guaranteed right to organize free of employer harassment. And that right could be enforced by the National Labor Relations Board that was set up under that act. However, in order to get the support of Southern Democratic senators and congressmen, President Roosevelt agreed that farm workers would be excluded from the protections of this act. Farm workers and domestic servants would be excluded. And guess who in the South were the farm workers and the domestic servants? African American people. That deal was made, the act went through, and farm workers were excluded. So farm workers did not have a federally guaranteed right to organize. In 1965, however, the Washington State Supreme Court decided a case called Kristad versus Lau, which involved a Chinese laundry in Seattle that was below the, I think it was a 10-worker minimum that would be covered by the NLRA. The state Supreme Court, after a long and drawn-out procedure, decided that under state law, farm workers had a state-guaranteed right to organize. And in this case of Victorino Garza versus Patnode and Real, the Superior Court in Benton County decided that that also applied to farm workers. And we obtained an injunction after about a 10-day long trial. And that was our first legal victory. Now, after that development, we would go to labor camps. The Trevino brothers, Roberto and Carlos and Lupe and others, would take me around to the labor camps in Yakima County, primarily in the Rogers, not Rogers Walla Walla, but Del Monte and Green Giant, who had asparagus camps. And we would talk about the workers having a right to organize, and I would say something brilliant like, ustedes tienen el derecho de organizarse. You all have the right to organize, free of employer harassment. There weren't any incidents at all in visiting those camps. So later in June of 1971, this is about 9 months after the strikes of the previous fall, Lupe came to see me in Seattle and said that he had been to the Rogers Walla Walla labor camp on Lateral B, where there were about 220 workers who were hired in Eagle Pass, Texas, all single males, and brought up here to Washington State, housed without any transportation of their own at this particular labor camp. And he asked me if I would go there, and I went there on Saturday, June 19th, 1971, with Erwin Nash, the photographer, Lupe, and 2 volunteers for the union. We didn't anticipate any kind of a problem. However, when we drove into the camp, there was an armed guard in a Walla Walla sheriff's deputy uniform and a sidearm. And we later found out that he was not, in fact, a deputy sheriff, but he was a supposedly called a supernumerary officer, where he had some kind of vague power, but he wasn't an employee of the sheriff's department. He asked us if we had the permission of the landowner to be there, and we did not, and I told him we did not, and I showed him my Washington State Bar Association card, and I explained to him that I had people who wanted legal assistance, and that's why I was there. He went off and made a phone call to his higher-ups in the sheriff's department and the prosecutor's office, and they said if they don't have the permission of Rogers Walla Walla Incorporated to be there, they have to leave. About 2 minutes later, a sheriff's squad car, Walla Walla County, showed up, and 2 deputies got out, all in uniform and with sidearms, and told us we had to leave. We didn't leave, and I explained to them that we had a legal right to be there. And if you come to think of it, would anybody suggest that a lawyer and an organizer of some kind didn't have a right to go into an apartment house here in downtown Walla Walla? No. It was only in this particular kind of labor camp that this right was being denied. So we were arrested. We were taken down to the sheriff's department. They did not keep us overnight. They made us promise that we wouldn't go right back out there. And to make a long story short, we had a district court trial here in Walla Walla, and Judge Howard Martin convicted us of criminal trespass. And then about 3 months later, we had what was then called a trial de novo, a new trial in the Superior Court, and we were again convicted of criminal trespass. Now, I'm a year out of law school, and all of a sudden I'm convicted of a crime, and I have an ethical complaint filed against me under the legal canons of ethics, charging that I was soliciting litigation. Then things kicked in. There were a number of people, lawyers, who were very concerned about this. They thought it was a gross violation, not just of my rights, but of the workers' rights and of the organizers' rights. And we had done quite a bit of research on this topic before, and one of the key authorities was a United States Supreme Court decision from 1948 called Marsh versus Alabama. And Mr. Marsh had been passing out leaflets in a, quote, company town, close quote, in Alabama. And this is a town where everything is owned by a particular company who employs all the people who live in the town, very close to a labor camp. The Supreme Court decided by 6-3 that there was a constitutional right for that person to be engaged in free speech activities over the objection of the person who owned the property. And that was a fundamental constitutional right involving the First Amendment. In our case, there was another case that was also key called NAACP versus Button. And that involved lawyers for the National NAACP Legal Defense Fund engaging in communicating with clients over the objection of Virginia state authorities. That also was decided in the favor of the NAACP, and holding that the right to legal assistance is a First Amendment right. It's a free speech right. So after this occurred, there were several lawyers in the Seattle area who petitioned the American Bar Association to file what's called an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief in the state Supreme Court. That was done, and the case resulted in a unanimous reversal of our convictions, holding that lawyers and union organizers have a right to go into labor camps and talk with people. Now, what happened locally here in Walla Walla before that decision was entered, and the American Bar Association had filed a brief that argued that not only did they have the right, but that lawyers had a professional duty to go into places where people were housed and were being denied legal assistance. In reaction to that, 15 members of the Bar Association here in Walla Walla resigned from the American Bar Association in protest. I told that story to a Walla Walla lawyer over the phone just a week or so ago, and he just laughed. You know, that the atmosphere is much different now. Now, I also want to just mention briefly that when these things occur and they're high conflict, it doesn't necessarily have to last forever and ever. One of the deputies that arrested us was a fellow named Scotty Ray, who was a deputy sheriff here in Walla Walla, and he later became the chief of security at the Seattle Art Museum. And in 1996, 8 years after I was appointed as a King County Superior Court judge, I had an election opponent. And he saw a campaign poster for me, and it said Michael J. Fox, which is my name, re-elect or something like that. And he called me at the courthouse, and he said, "Are you the same Michael J. Fox I arrested in Walla Walla 26 years ago?" And I said, "I am the self-same Fox." And he said, "Well, I didn't really want to arrest you, but I couldn't say that. I thought you seemed like a pretty decent guy. But I want to send you a campaign contribution." And apparently he did. I'm forbidden from knowing who contributed to a campaign. And then we had lunch after that. The election was, fortunately, I wasn't diselected. And Scotty called me up and said, "I'm getting married. Would you perform the marriage ceremony for me and Martha, my betrothed?" And I laughed and I said I'd be delighted. And he and I have been friends ever since then. And I also became friends with Art Eggers, who was the elected Walla Walla County Sheriff. He retired to the Seattle area, and we had lunch a number of times. He went out with Lupe and me to the University of Washington, where we spoke about this case and other things. And it doesn't have to all end in hostility. It can end in friendship and agreement and reconciliation. The last thing I want to say is that I'm very grateful for the opportunity that was afforded me to get involved in these cases that I've mentioned and about a dozen others that involve the farm worker movement in Eastern Washington. I wound up in these cases and also in cases on the western side of the mountains being involved with clients who became my heroes. And there are very few lawyers who can say that their clients have been their heroes. I had that unique experience, and I'm forever grateful for it. I wanted to talk about one other case, but we don't have any time for it. I know the Immigrants' Rights Group is here. The case that I was going to talk about is a case called Leduc versus Nelson, which put an end to warrantless raids in labor camps, where the Border Patrol would go into labor camps and just roust people out of bed at 4 in the morning and arrest them for being undocumented. I know that we're going to have a question and answer session, and maybe if the immigrants' rights folks are going to be there, we can have a little discussion about that case. That was only concluded in about 1986. So I want to thank you all very much, and I look forward to our question and answer session. Thank you.
Come on, give them a bigger hand than that. Woohoo! Wow. Marvelous. And if you want to hear more, right downstairs in the fellowship hall, there will be, and you want to hear this first, there'll be pizza, okay? But that's secondary. They will be there, the immigrants' rights will be there for question and answer and dialogue, and all who can attend, we want to welcome. Just thank you all so much. You know, I'm a preacher, you know, and when I hear people like this acting like Jesus, I say social justice for Jesus. Oh, Jesus, I thank you for this service today. May we go forth like you and like these gentlemen to work for the rights and justice of people. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.